it looks like. See, that was my door. It's on fire now from the side. Apartment's burning. Yeah, that looks like an explosion. Yeah, black suit. Back, yeah.
Watch the phone.
Yeah, that place burned. You said something down to this foot. Down. It ain't down there yet. You can only look at it. They're going through it. See those two SWAT guys coming to that fence?
In the early evening hours of April 9th of 1977, Los Angeles police officers Ted Severance and Bob Yarnall were on patrol waiting for darkness so they could investigate criminal activity on 108th Street between Avalon Boulevard and Stanford Avenue. Ted and Bob were young officers with 2.5 years of experience. They had worked as partners on a mid-watch felony car for the past year and found that they shared many common interests. Both Ted and Bob were aggressive street officers who continually discussed officer survival and tactics. On this particular night, Ted had canceled a scheduled overtime day off for personal reasons. Also, Ted and Bob had decided to switch roles so Ted could drive rather than complete reports. As darkness fell, 3 other individuals in a sedan were deciding where to buy narcotics. The sedan's driver had spent most of his adult life in state prison for dangerous felonies and weapon violations dating back to 1961. The male in the back seat had been arrested over 60 times and served time in Chino for robbery. The female passenger in the front seat also had an arrest record for grand theft auto, narcotic violations, and theft offenses. On 108th Street was a house where many people came and went throughout the day. It was not unusual to find 10 to 15 people gathered in the front yard, parked in vehicles, or standing on the front sidewalk. Officers in the area had named the house the Chicken Man's, and Ted and Bob had made over 100 felony arrests at or near this location. It was common knowledge to officers and suspects that the Chicken Man conducted bookmaking, gambling, and prostitution, received stolen property, and sold narcotics.
Later, huh? Yo, I see this baby doll over here, man. I'm gonna go check her out. Baby doll, baby doll. What's it gonna be like? Well, I got it, please.
As the officers traveled eastbound on 108th Street in the parking lane with their vehicle lights out, Ted paid particular attention to a Cadillac in front of the Chicken Man's house, while Bob studied the activities of a female moving toward a two-door sedan that was parked across the street. In a few moments, we will witness a gun battle between the driver and the two officers, whose safety will depend upon their firearms and tactical skills, their physical conditioning, and their commitment to survive an armed confrontation. As you watch this deadly encounter, carefully study the suspect's actions and the officer's reactions.
Man, it's pigs, man. Go.
Easy, Porter. See that? You got us a buy here.
Shit for the police. I got some shit for the ass. I ain't going back to the joint. I ain't going back to the joint.
Damn it, I knew they'd split.
Watch my stripes. They're over there.
Clear right.
The lights. Get them down.
Yeah, I'm losing.
He's right behind us.
They're right behind us here.
Man. Okay, clear left. We're making a right here. Can't quite see the plate.
Get there.
Man, no,
I'm not
man,
going
just-
back.
Oh,
I'm
hey,
not
they
going
got
back,
it,
man.
Shoot,
They got it.
Just get your hands. Come on, man.
Not going back.
Wait a minute, they're stopping. Let's pull over.
They're local six.
Wait a minute, they're getting out. She's eating a pill. Hey, asshole, over here.
Call, see the man 586E, 4708 South Figueroa. See the woman 242.
Officer needs help. Officer down. Century and McKinley. Officer needs help. Century down.
Oh, yes, officer needs help. There's an officer down. Century and McKinley. Officer needs help. Century and McKinley. There's an officer down.
Officer needs help. Officer needs help. Officer down. Century McKinley.
Oh, yes, officer needs help. Century and McKinley. There is an officer down.
Officer needs help.
Identified.
350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350. 350.
After watching the reenactment, Officer Ted Severance is going to share with us some of the lessons that were learned that evening. Ted, I understand there were some unusual aspects to your shooting. Could you share those with us?
Well, Rich, a few of the ironies that particular evening was, first of all, I was on a scheduled day off, which I canceled. That was my night to take books, and Bob would have been driving, but we had changed that, and I drove, and Bob took care of the books. And the third thing, I think the most important thing, is that Bob never wore a vest. And of course, on that particular evening, if he would have been driving, he wouldn't have had his vest on, and I have no reason to believe that he wouldn't have died that particular evening.
What was your frame of mind as you and Bob went over to 108th Street?
En route to 108th, I think we were both, chit-chatting back and forth, and our frame of mind was, as it was just about every day. We always headed for 108th, always with narcotics in mind, probably a little bit of tunnel vision, and by that I mean just strictly thinking of narcotics and not really too much anything else.
After you decided to stop the suspect's vehicle, can you tell us what happened?
They took away from the curb rapidly, not squealing the tires, but the vehicle lifted up, and they made a quick right-hand turn and again made a quick left-hand turn. And they put a good block and a half between us in the first few seconds, which should have indicated to me a little bit more evasiveness than what was really there.
Do you think you might have turned on your red lights too soon?
Well, I think we were guilty of what most young officers are guilty of, and that is kicking those red lights on just a little bit too soon. I think we should have tried to close the gap a little bit, get a little bit more knowledge on who was in the vehicle itself, the license plate, and what have you. But again, we turned them on a little bit too soon, I think.
Can you tell us why you were unable to run the license plate and contact communication division?
Well, that would have changed the entire set of events. We would have been able to discover that the vehicle was, in fact, West Hollywood stolen. It was in the system as a Code 6 Charles vehicle, armed and dangerous. And if we would have had the opportunity to have that knowledge prior to the stop, it would have afforded us all types of different options on our part. We would never have approached the vehicle as close as we did, nor would we have attempted to stop the vehicle by ourselves. We would have had a backup unit.
At what point, as you and Bob approached the vehicle, did the suspect gain the advantage?
I think in this particular situation, Bob was a passenger officer, and he deployed on the passenger side of the vehicle. When I had positioned myself, as we did in most of our stops, in a tactical situation or a position at the rear left rear quarter panel of the suspect's vehicle, at that point it should have been my responsibility to cover the driver's portion. I did that with my tail light directly pointed into the side view mirror of the suspect's vehicle, and had good eye contact with the suspect and was able to kind of read his mood. But when Bob discovered that the female in the right front of the suspect's vehicle was trying to eat the pills that apparently she had purchased from the chicken man's house, Bob hollered to me, "Hey, she's eating the pills." At that time, I think I reacted as most people would. Just human nature took over. I kind of scanned my light away from the suspect's eyes over to the right passenger and directed my attention to her. At that point, the suspect, was still maintaining his eye contact with me. I think at that point is where he really took the advantage away from me. He, at that time, made his move, and I had directed my attention somewhere else.
How do you think the suspect prepared to come out of the car with the weapon?
Well, what we feel happened is, as we approached the vehicle, I didn't observe the door open, the driver's door. But apparently what had happened is he had unlatched the vehicle and was holding the door closed with his left arm. At that time, he had his revolver in his right hand up against his chest, anticipating me coming all the way up to his window.
I understand that when you were shot the second time, you were unconscious for a few moments. What happened during the time that you were unconscious?
Well, during the time that I was unconscious, apparently the suspect had continued to walk toward me lying on the ground in a sitting position. I had my chin down to my chest and just kind of a slumped over state. Bob tells me that the suspect walked briskly toward me with his right arm and the revolver extended outward, and Bob felt that he was going to put a final coup de grace shot in the top of my head. That's when Bob stepped out from behind the suspect's vehicle and drew the attention of the suspect over to him.
They then had an exchange of gunfire.
The suspect turned toward Bob. Apparently the adrenaline had been pumping earlier, and he just had lost sight of the fact that there was an additional officer. But as Bob hollered at him, the suspect turned and raised the revolver toward Bob. Bob fired 2 shots in rapid succession, hitting the suspect in the chest. At that point, the suspect moved back toward Bob and the vehicles, we feel in an attempt to gain cover down under the bumper of the police vehicle, the suspect firing and Bob also continuing to fire.
How many shots did you and Bob fire?
Well, as I regained consciousness and the suspect was moving down toward cover, I fired all 6 from my weapon. Bob was still firing from his primary. He, again, fired all 6. When Bob moved back to the passenger door of our police vehicle in an attempt to reload, the suspect again continued to fire, and Bob pulled his backup weapon, kept it in a front waistband, and fired an additional 4 shots, which came to a total of 16 by both Bob and myself.
Although the suspect was hit multiple times, he continued to fire throughout the entire exchange of gunshots.
Well, what I actually saw and what was later discussed with Bob and myself, although I wasn't awake or conscious for the first 2 rounds, Bob said when he struck the suspect in the chest with his first 2 rounds, it was as if there was no effect on him whatsoever. Of course, at that time we were firing the 38 rounds, ball lead.
Anything that was significant about your call for help after you'd been wounded?
Well, I think one of the most significant things there was about it was, you know, both Bob and I were young officers, and we had not been out in the street a real long time. In 77th, you grow a little bit faster, but still we had a limited amount of time on the job. So we were able to retain a lot of things we learned in the academy. And there were several top-notch training officers at the academy when I went through, one of which was Terry Spears. And his officer survival class really impressed on me the fact of always knowing where you were. And not at one time during the initial stop and exiting the vehicle do I recall looking at the street sign. I had no knowledge of where we were, I felt. But apparently what had happened is all the years of going through scenarios and what have you had taught my subconscious to always know where I was. And when I went into the vehicle to place the help call, it came out just as clear as a bell. I was one of the people that were most surprised when I heard the call, the radio broadcast later.
What caused you to take the vehicle forward, Ted?
Well, at that point, I had been in the vehicle for a few seconds, and I was able to put out the help call, and I had just more or less collapsed onto the seat. At that point, I was still aware that Bob was toward the rear of our vehicle, and I felt he was probably still in a reloading stance. At that point, I heard an additional shot come from the front of the vehicle, and I felt that the suspect was going to continue to fire. So at that point, I just reached up. The car was still on. I reached up and engaged the gear down into the low position, just reached down with my hand and pushed on the gas to move the vehicle forward in an attempt to, again, neutralize the suspect.
Could you describe your injuries for us?
Well, the injuries to myself were, one, the first shot hit me directly in the chest. It split my pen and pencils on my uniform shirt. The second round was fired. It was a contact wound when he reached up and pulled his revolver into my stomach. That was about 3 inches below the Sam Brown, about midline, which naturally missed the vest entirely. That was in an upward motion. Zinged to quite a few of the organs, and then the bullet fragmented as it struck the pelvic plate in my right hip.
Ted, do you have some final comments for your fellow officers?
First of all, it's the vest. You know, there's a lot of officers out there that don't wear the vest. I understand that. And there's a lot of what some officers feel are valid reasons. But, you know, if I wouldn't have been wearing my vest that particular evening, there's probably a real good chance that I wouldn't be here today. And there's a possible chance that serious injury may have occurred to Bob, my partner. I think you owe it to yourself as well as your family and most of all to your partner out there to have a vest on. There's just real no excuse for not wearing the vest. Number 2 is backup weapons. You know, I've carried a backup weapon for every day I've worked uniform on this job, and quite often in plainclothes I also carry a backup weapon. That particular evening, Bob needed that backup weapon. He was in a reloading stance, had ejected all the casings out of his primary, went to his backup when the suspect started to again return fire, and may very well have saved his life. So there's a lot of good points to have that backup weapon. And number 3 is just officer survival. You know, officer survival sometimes is just taken for granted. Bob and I had the were afforded the opportunity to work together quite often. So we had our tactics down pretty well, and we always talked about tactics. Even though we were young officers, you know, we still talked about it. I think that's one of the things that helped us survive the situation that evening, is we had a drive to survive. We had our tactics down pretty well, and when it really hit the fan, we were able to draw from things we had talked about in the scenarios we'd worked over in our mind. So I think those three things, the vest, the backup weapon, and most definitely officer survival, and just a strong will to live and do your job.
Although Ted was seriously wounded, both Bob and Ted were prepared for the fierce gun battle they were involved in that evening. Both were committed to officer survival. They had the proper mental attitude. They were proficient with their weapons, physically fit, and above all, were conscious of using good tactics. On July 25th of 1985, Officer Bob Yarnall was medically retired from the police department as a result of 2 encounters with PCP. On November 30th of 1977, Bob discovered a PCP lab and later entered this house to safely rescue 3 children. He was hospitalized for several days and later received the police medal for his heroic actions. 7 years later in East Los Angeles, a foot pursuit of a narcotics dealer ended with PCP being thrown into Bob's face and mouth. Again, he was hospitalized from the drug's effect. Unfortunately, he was never able to totally recover from his encounter with PCP. Currently, Bob teaches part-time and coaches the varsity baseball team at a local school. His exposure to the suspect's gunfire without cover were direct reasons for Ted's survival. Ted eventually recovered from his injuries and is assigned to Hollywood detectives. Both Ted and Bob were awarded the department's Medal of Valor for their bravery during the shootout.
2 call, see the man 586E, 4708 South Figueroa. See the woman 242.
Officer needs help, officer down. Century and McKinley, officer needs help, century down,
Oh yes, officer needs help, there's an officer down. Century and McKinley, officer needs help. Century and McKinley, there's an officer down.
Officer needs help, officer down, Century McKinley.
Oh yes, officer needs help. Century and McKinley, there is an officer down.
Officer needs help.
Officer needs help. Century and McKinley.
It's Hickey. rookie.